Hi, welcome to the small shed. This week I'm back working on the front end of the Cyclekart. See you in a minute. Just doing the final bit of tuning before it all goes together for hopefully the last time, although I've got the possibility that it will always come apart fairly rapidly. Floors out to be varnished and painted on the underneath, varnished on top, and then be ready for its metal plate on top of that. I've got, these are minor things, but I want to take about 1 millimetre or so off the end of that rail so that they're all dead flush. That one is about 1 millimetre further forward than that one at the moment. That's really niggly stuff, but if I've got the drill set, the chop saw set up for a 5-degree cut to do the other ends, I might as well get that right now. And the only other thing I want to do, I've just taken the spring perch off. There's two things I want to do to that. I want to shorten it a bit because the nose cone will then slot over nicely, and there is, as far as I can see, there's absolutely no point in having a spring perch any further forward than the spring. I thought it might be useful in locating the nose cone, but in fact it looks to be more of a hindrance. So I'm going to take that off. Whether I do it square or tapered or what, I don't know. We'll just worry about that in a minute. And then I've been playing with the thought that at the moment the spring, I've got a bit left. The spring has got a curve in it. We bolt it down in the middle. Now what that's doing effectively is flattening the spring anyway. That squashes it flat. And it also means that the spring only acts from there and there rather than from the middle then. And it just doesn't seem a particularly clever way of doing it. So what I think I'm going to do is just take off the spring width on the very top layer of those side pieces so that it sits in the middle, squashed down hard on that centre section. It locates nicely between two effectively dropped sections, which will stop it going like that as well. And it also means it will work as a spring from that section rather than from that section. And I'm not sure whether that's good or bad, but it seems wrong to me to be squashing it flat in the middle. In the end I've decided to go old school with the relief on the top and do it by hand, but that you can see from the bit I've already finished, that just drops the spring into that gap, and then that should stop it waggling from side to side, and it allows it to just sit in there slightly lower on the curve of the spring itself. So we'll just do this side and we can put it all back together. So that's got the front end bolted up nicely there. I've just got to send off for some lock washers. When I ordered stuff the other day, I forgot the 12mm ones that I need for there, but we can replace those fairly soon. I'm also going to put an end cap into the section. It'll never be seen, but it just tidies it up a bit, that's all. Just makes it a neater job. So next thing, working backwards, is the covering all this bit up as well. I've got a glass fibre section that came away from the underneath of the nose cone. Let's just cut a little piece of the die bond, and I've got to take all the colour off it obviously, but that will go on there, and then I'll bond the little scuttle front cowl lower part onto that. The idea was that I would bond this to the plate and then I could bolt the plate to the back piece. So far so good. That took sort of half a day to do and mess around with, and then when I finally got it all back together, I suddenly realised that I was under the misapprehension that my perch was high on the high side, and that's where it started, but it ended up on the low side. So I thought, okay, I'll drill out and tap these holes here and here, and I can just fix this into it, and that'll fix the front plate anyway, and then I can bolt this up from underneath into this piece. Fine, so far so good. So we spend another hour or two fannying around with that, and then it suddenly dawned on me, of course, that these bolts are going in at 5 degrees angles. So if I drill and tap like that, I'm going to end up either having to use or get some of the 5-degree washers for M6, I think they are, bolts, or rethink it. So that was a waste of time. So I then decide to mark out where I can go right through with a bolt, right the way through the frame, come out underneath in the back and bolt it up from behind. No problem, jobs are good. And so I start drilling the holes out. I mark them all out in where I think is the right place, and I was having trouble drilling this one. It seemed to take a long while to get anywhere, and then it suddenly dawned on me that I'm actually drilling into these bolts that go at least to there. So again, total waste of time setting it all out. And I'm now at the position where I've got some of the little T-nuts that you can get for this track. I've placed those in. That will go on top, and I will then put a nut on top of that. And I'm happy with that now. I've got the plate that screws on that covers everything up. I've got the shroud bottom part of the cowl bolted up right through from the bottom with a big washer on the bottom and a nut on the top. I need to do a little bit of work just to get that tidied up so that it's the same as the one on the other side, but they now sit on there nicely. I've adjusted the size of the cowl down here so that it matches with the bottom. It needed a little bit of sanding off. I'm just making up the spring hangers out of a bit of much more solid bar than I'd got before. I think this is closer to 5mm. So I've drilled the first one. I've got an 8mm hole at one end and a 10 at the other, because the spring hanger has got an 8mm hole, and I put a 10mm hole in the axle. So I've done one, and what I've done then is I've drilled the 8mm hole at one end, stuck the bolt through, and then I'm using the top part as basically as a guide and a template to get the drill bit in the right place, and that will mark it for the drilling the second hole. And for those that think you can't build a Cyclekart without lots of expensive machinery and tools, there you are, junior hacksaw. I could have done the holes with a normal drill, hand drill, you know, a battery type drill, and we've got the spring hangers made. without using a fat lot of tools. Tiny little vice, just clamped to a bench. I've got a bigger vice out in the garage and bigger hacksaw, but this seems to work just as well. Just a little bit of patience needed, that's all. So that's got me 4 spring hangers sorted with all the right holes at the right ends and everything else. What I'm going to do now is just whip it out into the garage and put it on the bench grinder. Take a bolt with the right sized washer on, depending on which end it is, and then just grind these back to a half round on the end, tidy them up, and then just give them a sand back so that we're back to the bare metal rather than the blackened steel, and we should be just about done then and start to be able to put it together. One of the biggest expenses so far has been ironmongery and the repetition of buying ironmongery to do the same job and still getting the wrong thing. The front spring hangers are a case in point. When I got that spring, it had a little pin on it which I got the new grease nipples for, and which were ideal, but for the fact they were quite worn where the spring hangers had been sitting. You can see it's quite badly worn there, and I was going to reuse those and may will still well remanufacture something similar, but in the interim I just put some normal bolts through and then decided that that wouldn't do, A, because the head wasn't very good in terms of authenticity, and secondly because you're putting all the load of the spring hangers onto the thread, which is going to just squash it the same as it had done here and wear it. So then I thought, oh, I'll get some shouldered bolts, which I got, which would run through, and then the bearing would be onto the shoulder, but unfortunately the length of that wasn't long enough to go right through, and I thought, well, if I get some longer bolts than that, they'd have a longer shoulder. Then I found exactly what I want, quite by accident, and that is bolts which are exactly to my specification in terms of length and diameter. Those are a 10mm diameter, those are an 8mm diameter. They've got an M8 and an M6 thread on them respectively, and an Allen screw head. And in fact, if you put that one against that one, you can see I've already got the beginnings of exactly what I want. If I want to remanufacture these, you just need drilling out in the middle, tapping 2BA, yes, 2BA, and a side hole drilling and a little groove putting in, and I can grease these from a grease nipple on the back, and they're ideal. I've just at the moment put castellated knots on, but I haven't drilled through for split pins because at the moment it's not a permanent fix. I've just put spring washers on at the moment, but that will hold the whole thing rigid and has given me pretty much exactly what I want. Right, so one thing that I've been probably avoiding for a long while is getting these radius arm brackets fitted, partly because I think these are probably the weakest part of the whole thing. If anything's going to fail, I think it's going to be here. Now I've got an M8 bolt to hold them, and I don't think anything will fail in the strength of actually bolting the bracket to the frame rails, but I suspect the actual bracket itself may fail. Although we've had them beefed up, they've welded a gusset plate in, but I'm not 100% sure that will work. We'll see. But what I've done, I've put a bolt through the middle, and that will go right the way through to the other side, and we'll have a nut on the back and a lock washer, so that'll be inside the cockpit above the floor level, so it won't be a problem. It's got a rounded dome nut on it, not a problem at all, and that will then go out the radius arms on the front axle. So far so good, but there is a risk that that is then going to move, given that most of the forces on this are going to be acting from the two radius arms. And I hadn't got enough room really to drill two new holes and put two bolts in, and if I had, they wouldn't have landed very satisfactorily inside that inner rail because it's got the two grooves in it. So what I've done is to use the existing, there are a pair of smaller holes either side of that, which I'm just putting, I've run a 4mm drill through and tapped them out M5, and then I'm just going to put the M5 bolts through and into there, and they are tapped into the rail like so. You can just see them there and there. And that really just prevents that thing rocking once it's bolted on. They're doing no more than that, I think. So I'm hoping that will be sufficiently strong to hold all that together. They're a bit of a pain to do up because they are small and in a quite restricted position, but they seem to have tightened up, nipped up well. Whole thing is tight and rigid, and what that means is that is the very last bit of the chassis work I need to do, other than the mountings for the rear axle, which will go through from top to bottom. The material for that should be arriving tomorrow, so if I get those holes drilled as well, we can then just start and do a last but one assembly on the chassis rails. I say last but one because I'll assemble it, hopefully get the thing running and try it out and see what happens. If there are any alterations to be made, that is the time to do it, to remake these brackets or to find other issues that we may have. Once all that's done and I'm happy and content that the thing is okay, however many times I have to alter things like this to get there, we can then worry about a last strip down, which will be to get it painted. But I'm not going to worry about that at the moment. I want to get the thing up and running first. And this is the finished arrangement now. You can see we've got the bottom bracket fitted, top ones were fitted to the stub axles some while ago, and the radius rods now are connected in roughly. And what that enables me to do is, by shortening or lengthening top or bottom of those rods, we can put a degree of caster into that front axle depending on how tight or loose they are. So that's all just temporarily nipped up at the moment, but that's the arrangement for the front end, and it certainly seems to have stiffened it all up nicely. Well, that's pretty much buttoned up the front end of the cart as far as I'm concerned. It's not assembled necessarily, but it's all technically sort of screwed together in the way that I want it to be, and I think overall I'm quite happy that it's a lot stronger than I thought it would be now, so I'm fairly convinced that it's going to survive a run. Obviously we will see in action, but I don't think things are going to fall off quite as much as I thought they would to start with. It's all beginning to feel quite solid when you actually bolt the things together. So I hope the video was of interest. Look forward to seeing you next week. We'll be doing something different on the cart. I hope to see you then. Bye.